Ma'am, I need you to stand. The words sliced through the quiet cabin like a snapped wire. Dominique Reynolds looked up startled, her hand still resting on the chilled champagne flute beside her seat. A flight attendant hovered over her smile-tight voice polite, but the edge underneath was sharp enough to draw blood. Behind the attendant stood a white man in a tailored gray suit, one hand on the seat divider as if the space already belonged to him. Before Dominique could answer, the man leaned forward and set his designer briefcase on the floor. The message was clear. Move. Passengers nearby turned in their seats, phones tilted upward. The hush of first class became an electric silence. "This gentleman is our preferred guest," the attendant said smoothly. "There's been a seating adjustment. We'll need you to relocate to premium economy." "Preferred guest." Dominique blinked. She had booked this private suite weeks ago, paying more than some people's monthly mortgage. Her boarding pass, seat 2A, sat right there on the armrest, proof of her place. Yet here was a stranger being ushered into the space she had paid for with nothing more than a corporate phrase. Seating adjustment. Dominique Reynolds hadn't built Nexus Systems from nothing by allowing herself to be pushed aside. At 42, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her worth down to the decimal point. Her deep burgundy dress, chosen specifically for tomorrow's board meeting, was simple but impeccably tailored, much like the business she had crafted over 2 decades. She thought of her grandmother Eloise, who had raised her in Detroit's East Side. "Baby," she used to say, "in this world they'll try to make you invisible twice, once for being black, once for being a woman. Your job is to remain undeniably present without raising your voice." The flight attendant, Veronica Miller, according to her name tag, shifted her weight, the pressed white of her uniform stark against the cream leather of the first-class cabin. Her blue eyes carried a practiced patience that felt more like dismissal than service. Dominique took a slow breath, feeling the weight of 20 pairs of eyes. The man in the gray suit, still standing, still expecting, checked his watch, as if her presence was merely a scheduling inconvenience. "This is my seat," she said finally, her voice steady as she held up the boarding pass. "I reserved it specifically." Veronica's smile tightened. "I understand, but we have operational discretion for preferred passengers. Mr. Walker has priority status." James Walker. The name meant nothing to Dominique, but the way Veronica said it carried the assumption that it should. He stood taller now, chest slightly puffed, feeding on the deference. "I'm sure premium economy will be perfectly comfortable." Veronica continued, her voice dropping to a hushed tone, as if they were discussing a medical condition rather than a seat assignment. "It's just for this one flight. Just for this one flight. Just this one dignity. Just this one principle." Dominique glanced around the cabin, taking in the details she had noted when boarding. The couple in 4B and C stealing glances while pretending to read. The elderly white man in 1C deliberately focusing on his newspaper. The young Hispanic woman, another flight attendant named Elena, according to her tag, hovering by the galley, watching with a tightness around her eyes that suggested discomfort. No one spoke. No one intervened. Just like when she'd been the only black woman at investment meetings. Just like when she'd been asked to show ID 3 times at her own company's gala. Dominique felt her phone vibrate in her purse. Probably Terrence, her COO, with updates about tomorrow's $700 million contract negotiation with AtlanticGlobal Airlines, the very company whose plane she sat in now. The irony wasn't lost on her. She could make a scene. She could demand the manager. She could pull up her company profile showing she was worth more than this entire aircraft. But then she'd be another stereotype, the angry black woman who couldn't handle herself in elite spaces. Instead, she thought about power. Real power. The kind that doesn't need to raise its voice. "Excuse me," said James Walker, his patience visibly thinning. "I have connections in Singapore waiting." Connections. Of course he did. Dominique stood gathering her purse and tablet with deliberate slowness. Not rushing, not accommodating, simply moving at her own pace. "Thank you for your understanding," Veronica said, relief flooding her features. "Premium economy is quite spacious on this aircraft," as if the issue was legroom rather than principle. Dominique stepped into the aisle, the weight of her decision settling between her shoulder blades. She felt the familiar tension, the one that had accompanied her through boardrooms and venture capital meetings, through country clubs and executive retreats, the tension of choosing which battles to fight and how to fight them. As she moved past James Walker, she caught a whiff of expensive cologne and entitlement. He didn't meet her eyes as he slid into her seat, immediately pressing the call button for service. Some power is loud, demanding immediate. It takes up space without apology. But Dominique knew another kind of power, the kind that waits, the kind that calculates, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself because its impact speaks volumes. She followed Veronica toward the premium economy section, already formulating her response. Not with raised voice or public confrontation, but with the silent, devastating precision that had made Nexus Systems the technological backbone of the airline industry. And as she walked away from seat 2A, Dominique knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was far from over. "I'm sorry, but operational protocols take precedence over individual bookings." Veronica Miller's voice carried the practiced neutrality of someone who had delivered uncomfortable news 1,000 times before. She stood in the aisle beside seat 2A, one hand resting on the headrest, as if physically guarding it for James Walker. Dominique felt something shift inside her chest, not anger, but a cool, analytical awareness. The same clarity that had guided her through 2 market crashes and countless attempted corporate takeovers. She observed the cabin dynamics with detached precision. What specific protocol allows you to reassign confirmed first-class bookings? Dominique asked, her voice measured. Not combative, merely inquiring. Veronica's smile flickered for a fraction of a second. "Our preferred passenger protocol gives us discretion to optimize seating for elite status members." Elite status? The words hung in the air like perfume, pleasant-sounding, but ultimately artificial. Dominique noted how Walker straightened at the phrase as if it confirmed something essential about his worth. "I see," Dominique said, letting the 2 simple words carry the weight of her skepticism. "And this protocol is documented where a young professional a few seats away looked up from his phone, suddenly interested. A woman across the aisle shifted uncomfortably. The theater of authority was most effective when unchallenged, and Dominique had just introduced the first crack." Veronica's professional veneer slipped for just a moment. "It's an internal policy, ma'am. Now, if you'll please follow me to premium economy, we need to prepare for departure." Dominique considered her options. She could escalate demand the captain invoke her rights as a passenger, reveal her identity as CEO of the company that maintained AtlanticGlobal's entire digital infrastructure. The thought was tempting, but revealing her hand too early would be a strategic error. She glanced at Walker again. Mid-40s, expensively dressed, but with the slightly overeager polish of someone who had climbed rather than inherited. The way Veronica deferred to him suggested familiarity beyond professional courtesy. "Your bag, ma'am?" Veronica prompted, gesturing to the leather laptop case in the overhead bin. The cabin had fallen into that peculiar hush that occurs when strangers witness an uncomfortable exchange. Some passengers pretended to be absorbed in books or screens. Others watched with the thinly disguised interest of those witnessing live entertainment. Dominique reached for her bag, purposefully unhurried. "I'd like to confirm that my original seat assignment is being changed due to a preferred passenger protocol rather than any issue with my booking. Is that correct?" The question was precise, designed to create a record. Several passengers were filming discreetly now. In an age of viral videos and social media outrage, documentation was its own form of power. Veronica hesitated, perhaps sensing the careful construction of the question. "As I explained, we have discretion to optimize our cabin for elite passengers. Mr. Walker is a regional manager with our airline and has highest tier status." There it was. Not company policy, but personal connection. The truth slipping out between practiced lines. James Walker finally spoke his voice, carrying the casual authority of someone unaccustomed to being questioned. "Look, I don't want to make this difficult. I've got a red-eye to Singapore after we land and I need proper rest. The airline is just taking care of its own." Taking care of its own. The phrase struck Dominique with particular clarity. How many times had she heard similar justifications for exclusion, for bias camouflaged as procedure? She thought of tomorrow's contract. $700 million, 3 years of development, the culmination of Nexus Systems' expansion into global aviation. All of it waiting for her signature tomorrow morning in Seattle. "Of course," Dominique said finally. "I wouldn't want to delay our departure." The relief on Veronica's face was immediate and telling. She had expected a scene had perhaps dealt with passengers who refused to be displaced before. The fact that this well-dressed black woman was complying defied some unspoken expectation. As Dominique turned to follow Veronica toward premium economy, she noticed Elena Rodriguez, the younger flight attendant, watching from near the galley. Her expression carried something that looked remarkably like apology. The walk through business class into premium economy felt longer than it was. Dominique registered the shift in cabin atmosphere, the seats closer together, the lighting a shade less gentle, the passengers less insulated from one another. Not uncomfortable by any standard measure, but a clear demotion from the private suite she had booked. "Here we are." 5C, Veronica said, gesturing to an aisle seat. "I'll have your pre-departure beverage brought right over." As if champagne would wash away the indignity. Dominique settled into the seat, placing her purse beneath the chair in front of her. She didn't immediately reach for her phone, didn't immediately react. Instead, she sat perfectly still, feeling the texture of the situation fully. Around her premium economy, passengers pretended not to notice her arrival. This woman in an expensive dress clearly relocated from first class. A businessman across the aisle glanced at her, then quickly away, a flash of discomfort crossing his features. A mother with a young daughter whispered something, eyes darting toward Dominique, then back to her child. Veronica lingered for a moment, perhaps waiting for some final word or complaint. When Dominique offered nothing, she retreated toward first-class posture, relaxing with each step. Only then did Dominique allow herself a single deep breath. Not of resignation, but of decision. Power wasn't always about immediate reaction. Sometimes it was about calculated response. She reached for her phone. "Here's your sparkling water, miss." The flight attendant paused, glancing awkwardly at the seat assignment on her tablet. Reynolds. Dominique Reynolds. She accepted the plastic cup, noting it was nothing like the crystal glassware she'd been offered in first class just 20 minutes ago. The difference wasn't just in materials, but in the subtle psychological message they conveyed. You are worth less here. From seat 5C in premium economy, Dominique could see the edge of first class through the dividing curtain. James Walker was already reclining, champagne in hand, scrolling through his phone with the relaxed posture of a man who had never questioned whether spaces would accommodate him. "Is there anything else you need?" asked the attendant, clearly eager to move on. "No, thank you." Dominique's voice remained neutral, betraying none of the calculations happening behind her calm exterior. As the attendant moved away, Dominique surveyed her new surroundings. Premium economy on AtlanticGlobal's Boeing 787 wasn't uncomfortable by any objective measure. The seats were wider than standard economy, the legroom adequate, the amenities sufficient. But the symbolic demotion stung in ways that had nothing to do with physical comfort. Across the aisle, a white businessman in his early 50s kept stealing glances at her. Michael Thompson, according to the luggage tag visible on his carry-on, wore the slightly rumpled look of someone on the tail end of a business trip. His expression carried a mixture of curiosity and discomfort, as if witnessing something he knew wasn't right, but couldn't quite name. 2 rows ahead, a Hispanic woman in her mid-30s sat with a sleeping child of about 7. Sofia Alvarez. Dominique heard when another passenger addressed her had noticed the relocation too. Her eyes had met Dominique's briefly as she settled into 5C, a flash of recognition passing between them, the silent acknowledgement shared by those who have experienced similar subtle exclusions. "Excuse me," a quiet voice said from the aisle. Dominique turned to find the younger flight attendant, Elena Rodriguez, according to her name tag, standing beside her seat. Unlike Veronica's practiced corporate smile, Elena's expression seemed genuinely apologetic. "I brought you this." She discreetly handed Dominique a premium amenity kit, not the luxury version from first class, but better than the standard premium economy offering. "I'm sorry about the adjustment." The slight emphasis on the last word communicated volumes. This wasn't standard procedure. This was something else entirely. "Thank you, Elena." Dominique accepted the kit with a small nod. As Elena moved away, Dominique noticed a young white man in his late 20s a few rows back, phone angled in her direction. Ryan Cooper, she would later learn, was a tech professional who had recognized her immediately. Unlike the others, he wasn't merely watching, he was documenting. Dominique turned her attention to her phone, scrolling to her secure messaging app. The notification she'd felt earlier was indeed from Terrence Williams, her COO. Final contract edits complete. Bradford's team seems eager to sign tomorrow. $700 over 3 years with maintenance options. Let me know when you land. The message landed with particular weight now. AtlanticGlobal Airlines, the very company that had just displaced her from her rightful seat, was poised to sign a landmark contract with Nexus Systems tomorrow morning. The integration of Nexus's digital infrastructure would fundamentally transform AtlanticGlobal's operations, from ticketing to crew scheduling, from maintenance tracking to customer data management. $700 million, the largest contract in Nexus's history, and they had just treated the CEO like an inconvenience. The irony wasn't lost on Dominique. Neither was the opportunity. She glanced toward first class again. Through the narrow gap in the curtain, she could see Veronica laughing at something James Walker had said, her professional demeanor softening into something more familiar. The champagne flowed freely. Walker had made himself comfortable in a seat that didn't belong to him, enjoying service that wasn't rightfully his. Behind her, Ryan Cooper's phone remained raised, capturing the ongoing discrepancy in treatment. The captain's voice came over the intercom, smooth and authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Andrew Ramirez. We're currently number 4 for departure and should be airborne within 15 minutes. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for departure." As the announcement ended, Dominique felt the familiar weight of decision settle into her chest. The same weight she'd felt when walking away from a secure job to start Nexus with nothing but an idea and determination. The same weight she'd felt when refusing a buyout offer that would have made her personally wealthy but dismantled the company she'd built. She thought of her grandmother again. Eloise Reynolds had cleaned office buildings at night for 30 years, entering spaces where she would never be invited during daylight hours. Remember, she used to tell Dominique, sometimes power is quiet. Sometimes it's just knowing which switch controls the lights. Dominique looked down at her phone again, then at the fastened seatbelt sign, now illuminated above. In her mind, she could see the digital architecture of AtlanticGlobal's entire operation, the intricate web of systems that Nexus had mapped during the contract preparation phase. Systems that would soon be under her company's management. Systems that, with the right commands, could be accessed even now. She thought about dignity, about principle, about the countless others who had been displaced, demoted, diminished without the leverage she now possessed. Her burgundy-painted nail hovered over the phone's screen. One message. That's all it would take. "Did you see what happened?" The whispered question came from the young man in 6D, leaning forward to address his seatmate. That woman in the burgundy dress got kicked out of first class for that guy in the gray suit. Dominique didn't turn around, but her ears caught the conversation clearly. The cabin was now filled with the white noise of pre-departure flight attendants completing final checks, overhead bins, closing the distant rumble of engines warming up. Perfect acoustic camouflage for gossip. She didn't look happy, his companion replied. I would have raised hell. Wouldn't you, Dominique thought. But that was the difference. That was always the difference. The luxury of reactive emotion wasn't equally distributed. She recalled the board meeting 3 years ago when investor Martin Gladwell had repeatedly addressed his questions to Terrence rather than to her despite her position as CEO. She hadn't called him out publicly. Instead, she'd meticulously documented the pattern, then presented it privately to the board chair, resulting in Gladwell's quiet removal from the investment committee. Calculated, precise, effective. Her phone vibrated again. This time it was Alicia, her executive assistant, hotel confirmed. Car service waiting at Seattle. Bradford scheduled for 9 a.m. at their HQ. Legal team on standby for signatures. Everything proceeding according to plan. Except for this. Dominique closed her eyes briefly, accessing a memory she rarely revisited. She was 24, just promoted to lead developer at Tech Fusion. The company holiday party at an upscale restaurant. The host stopping her at the door, asking if she was looking for the service entrance. The humiliation burning in her chest as colleagues watched. Her manager intervening embarrassed but not outraged. She had smiled through it, had continued the evening as if it hadn't happened, had even accepted the host's clumsy apology. But the next day she'd updated her resume. 6 months later, the seed of what would become Nexus Systems was planted. That night had taught her something essential. Direct confrontation offered momentary satisfaction, but strategic response created lasting change. The aircraft jolted slightly as it began pushing back from the gate. The safety demonstration started flight attendants moving through their choreographed routine with practiced precision. Elena Rodriguez demonstrated the oxygen mask procedures near the front of Premium Economy, her eyes briefly meeting Dominique's as she passed. Across the aisle, Michael Thompson was watching her now with undisguised curiosity. He'd clearly overheard the whispers. His expression held that particular discomfort of someone witnessing injustice but unsure of their role in addressing it. Dominique's mind continued its strategic assessment. The preferred passenger protocol Veronica had cited was almost certainly fabricated, or at least selectively applied. James Walker might indeed be a regional manager, might indeed have elite status. But policy didn't displace confirmed first-class passengers for airline employees unless there was an operational necessity. This was personal preference, masked as corporate procedure. The oldest sleight of hand in professional spaces. And it had been performed without a second thought, with the calm assurance that there would be no meaningful consequences. The plane began taxiing toward the runway, engines growling with increasing urgency. Dominique felt her phone in her hand, a gateway to action resting against her palm. She thought of the contract again. $700 million. A transformational deal for both Nexus and AtlanticGlobal. The culmination of years of development and negotiation. Was she really considering jeopardizing that over a seat assignment? Not over a seat. Over a principle. Over the casual assumption that her dignity was negotiable. Over the unspoken belief that she should accept being displaced, being diminished, being dismissed as simply the cost of moving through the world in her skin. Her grandmother's voice echoed again. Don't confuse making peace with surrendering ground. The aircraft paused at the runway threshold, engines idling as they awaited clearance for takeoff. The final moment of connection to the ground before committing to the sky. Dominique made her decision. With swift, decisive movements, she opened her secure messaging app and selected a contact labeled Operations Team Alpha. Her fingers moved across the screen, typing a message that appeared to be innocuous to any casual observer. Initiate Protocol 5 verification on AtlanticGlobal integration. Full system diagnostic. Priority override. Authorization DR Alpha 9721. To anyone reading over her shoulder, it would look like standard corporate communication. But to the recipient's Nexus Systems elite operations team, it was something else entirely. It was the key turning in a very specialized lock. She pressed send just as the engines roared to full power, the aircraft accelerating down the runway, pressing her back into her seat. The digital message raced ahead of the physical plane, reaching its destination before the wheels left the ground. As the aircraft lifted into the evening sky, banking gracefully over the glittering city below, Dominique felt a curious sense of calm settle over her. Not the resignation of someone who had accepted defeat, but the patience of someone who had just set powerful forces in motion. In the quiet hum of the climbing aircraft, surrounded by strangers who had witnessed her displacement but not her response, Dominique Reynolds waited. The game was now in play, and no one on the plane, not James Walker enjoying her champagne in 2A, not Veronica Miller with her preferred passenger protocol, not Captain Ramirez in the cockpit, had any idea what was about to happen. Power, after all, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it moved in silence, building momentum until its impact became undeniable. Sometimes it was just knowing which switch controlled the lights. "What do you mean the system is locked?" Jessica Lawson, Chief Digital Officer of AtlanticGlobal Airlines, stared at her screen in disbelief. The monitoring dashboard that normally displayed a reassuring array of green status indicators had transformed into a sea of yellow alerts, with several critical systems flashing red. 3,000 miles from Flight 372 in AtlanticGlobal's operations center outside Boston, the first ripples of Dominique's message were becoming visible. "It's a security protocol activation," explained Taylor Morrison, the night shift systems administrator. "The verification process is requesting executive authentication for all scheduling, booking, and financial approvals. Override it." Jessica demanded, the fluorescent lights of the operations center highlighting the growing tension in her face. "I can't," Taylor replied, hands moving frantically across the keyboard. "It's coming directly from the Nexus integration layer. We don't have access to that architecture yet." Jessica felt a cold wave of realization wash over her. The Nexus integration, the system they were scheduled to fully adopt tomorrow with the contract signing, had somehow triggered a security lockdown. Without direct access to Nexus's proprietary protocols, they were effectively locked out of their own systems. "Get Bradford on the phone," she said, naming AtlanticGlobal's CEO, "and find out who at Nexus has override authority." Meanwhile, 35,000 feet above Pennsylvania, Flight 372 continued its journey westward, the passengers unaware of the digital storm brewing below. In seat 5C, Dominique Reynolds appeared to be working quietly on her tablet, her face betraying nothing of the calculated response she had initiated. She knew exactly what was happening. Protocol 5 was a comprehensive security verification originally designed to protect against unauthorized access, a full-system diagnostic that temporarily restricted operations pending executive confirmation. It was a legitimate tool created for legitimate purposes. But in this context, it was also something else, a digital freeze on AtlanticGlobal's entire operational infrastructure. Not permanent, not damaging, but immediate and attention-getting, like cutting power to a room to show who controlled the light switch. Dominique glanced at her watch. 3 minutes since the protocol activation. By now, operations centers in Boston, Chicago, and Dallas would be seeing the alerts. Within 5 minutes, they would trace the authorization code and realize it came from her. Within 10, they would begin attempting to contact her, but she would not be taking their calls. Not yet. Near the front of the aircraft, Elena Rodriguez emerged from the first-class cabin, a slight frown creasing her forehead as she consulted with another flight attendant in hushed tones. Something was happening. Dominique returned her attention to her tablet, reviewing tomorrow's contract points with the focused detachment that had become her professional signature. $700 million over 3 years. Complete digital transformation of AtlanticGlobal's customer experience systems. Integration of Nexus's proprietary scheduling algorithms. A partnership that would reshape the airline's future. All of it now hanging by a digital thread that she controlled. Her phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number, DR. This is Thomas Bradford, CEO of AtlanticGlobal. We have an urgent situation with the Nexus integration. Please call me immediately at this number. She read it twice, then set the phone aside without responding. Thomas Bradford. The man she was scheduled to meet tomorrow to sign the historic contract was now reaching out directly, bypassing normal channels. Good. The message had been received. But she wasn't ready to engage. Not until the full impact was felt. In the cockpit, Captain Andrew Ramirez was receiving his first indication that something unusual was happening. The flight management system continued to function normally. Flight controls, navigation, and safety systems were entirely separate from the commercial operations infrastructure, but a message had appeared on his communications display. Notice Atlantic. Global operational systems under security review. Ground operations temporarily restricted. Maintain normal flight procedures. Will advise. Ramirez exchanged a puzzled glance with his first officer. Ever seen that before? Never, the first officer replied, studying the message. Could be an IT drill. Let me check with dispatch. As they attempted to clarify the situation, the first effects were becoming visible throughout AtlanticGlobal's network. At JFK Gate, agents found themselves unable to process boarding passes for the next wave of departures. In Chicago, baggage systems operated in manual mode. In Dallas, crew scheduling froze mid-assignment. The airline, the entire technological ecosystem that kept planes moving, passengers flowing, and operations functioning, was experiencing a controlled pause. Not a crash, not a disaster, but a demonstration of vulnerability. Back on Flight 372, the cabin intercom chimed. Ladies and gentlemen, came Veronica Miller's voice. This is your lead flight attendant. We've been advised by our dispatch that there will be a brief update to our arrival information once we're closer to Seattle. In the meantime, please enjoy your flight. We'll begin beverage service momentarily. The carefully worded announcement revealed nothing, but Dominique noted the underlying tension. They knew something was happening, but didn't yet understand what or why. Her phone lit up again now with a cascade of notifications. 3 missed calls from Thomas Bradford. 5 messages from Terrence Williams. An urgent email from AtlanticGlobal's legal department. She silenced the device and slipped it into her purse. They would wait. All of them would wait until she was ready to engage. In first class, James Walker remained oblivious, now enjoying what should have been her dinner service, the privilege he had claimed without question, continuing to envelop him in its comfortable bubble. Across the aisle, Michael Thompson was watching Dominique with increasing interest. "Excuse me," he said finally, leaning slightly toward her. "I couldn't help noticing what happened earlier. That was completely inappropriate." "Are you going to file a complaint?" Dominique offered a small, measured smile. "I believe the situation is already being addressed." Thompson nodded, clearly unsatisfied with the vague response but unwilling to press further. He couldn't know that the complaint was already reverberating through AtlanticGlobal's entire digital ecosystem, that the addressing was happening on a scale he couldn't imagine. As beverage service began in premium economy, Dominique accepted a glass of wine from Elena, who lingered a moment longer than necessary. "Ms. Reynolds," she said quietly, "the captain has asked if you might be available to speak with him when it's convenient." So it had begun. They had identified her, had connected the dots between the passenger displaced from first class and the CEO whose company now held their operational systems in a digital grip. "Of course," Dominique replied. "After the beverage service would be fine." Elena nodded and moved on, but the message was clear. The power dynamic had shifted. The woman they had casually displaced was now being approached with deference. Not because she had made a scene. Not because she had demanded recognition. But because she had demonstrated with silent precision exactly who held the real leverage. As the plane continued westward into the darkening sky, Dominique sipped her wine and waited. The next move was theirs. All flights are showing delayed. All of them. Thomas Bradford's voice carried the strained disbelief of a man watching his company's operations unravel in real time. The AtlanticGlobal CEO stood in the center of the emergency operations room, surrounded by screens displaying cascading yellow and red alerts across the network map. "Not delayed, sir. Held for security verification." Jessica Lawson corrected her fingers, flying across her keyboard. "The system is requiring executive authentication for every departure. It's not a crash. It's functioning exactly as designed during a security protocol activation." "Which protocol?" "Protocol 5. It's part of the Nexus integration we've been implementing." Bradford's expression darkened. "And who authorized this activation?" Jessica hesitated before answering. "Authorization code DR Alpha 9721. DR would be Dominique Reynolds, CEO of Nexus Systems." Reynolds Bradford repeated confusion evident. "Why would she trigger this the night before our contract signing?" "Get her on the phone." "We're trying, sir." "She's not responding. According to our system, she's currently on Flight 372 to Seattle." Bradford stared at his chief digital officer. "She's on one of our planes right now." "Yes, sir. Boston to Seattle, scheduled to arrive at 11:42 p.m. local time. I want to speak to the captain of that flight immediately." As the situation intensified at headquarters, the effects rippled across AtlanticGlobal's entire network. At Chicago O'Hare International Airport, the 7:15 p.m. departure to London sat fully boarded at the gate, passengers growing increasingly restless. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced the gate agent, forcing a smile through her growing anxiety, "we're experiencing a brief system verification delay. We should have an update for you shortly." An executive in 2C raised his hand. "The flight tracker app says all AtlanticGlobal flights are delayed. What's really happening?" The question hung in the air as dozens of other passengers reached for their phones to verify the claim. Sure enough, the familiar red delayed indicator appeared beside every AtlanticGlobal flight across the country. "Is this a system-wide outage?" someone else called out. "Not an outage," the gate agent clarified, choosing her words carefully. "It's a scheduled security verification. We apologize for the inconvenience, but it wasn't just one flight." In terminals across the country, the same scene played out as operations ground to a controlled halt. No new boardings could proceed. No baggage could be processed automatically. No crew reassignments could be finalized. The airline, one of the largest in the world, had effectively been placed on pause. Back aboard Flight 372, Captain Andrew Ramirez received a priority communication from AtlanticGlobal headquarters. The message was brief but extraordinary. "Captain Ramirez, this is CEO Bradford. We have reason to believe passenger Dominique Reynolds in premium economy has triggered a network-wide security protocol. Approach with respect and diplomacy. Request she contact me ASAP. Critical situation developing. Authorization, Bradford Exec 1. Ramirez read the message twice, then exchanged a look with his first officer. "Did we just get orders to speak with a passenger about a network security issue?" the first officer asked. Apparently Ramirez replied, equally puzzled. "And not just any passenger. Must be someone important if Bradford himself is involved." In the premium economy cabin, Dominique continued working on her tablet, outwardly calm, despite the storm she had unleashed. She had not responded to any of the messages now accumulating on her phone. Let them wait. Let them feel what it was like to have control suddenly stripped away, to have protocols cited against you with no recourse. Across the aisle, Michael Thompson kept stealing glances at her, clearly sensing something significant was unfolding. 2 rows ahead, Sofia Alvarez had noticed the unusual activity as well. Flight attendants, moving with greater urgency, hushed conversations near the galley. In first class, James Walker remained insulated from the growing tension, now reclining with noise-canceling headphones, the very picture of entitled comfort. Veronica Miller attended to him with practiced deference, refreshing his drink without being asked. The contrast wasn't lost on Elena Rodriguez, who moved through the premium economy cabin with increasing awareness of the power shift taking place. As she passed Dominique's seat, she leaned down slightly. "The captain would like to speak with you when you have a moment," she said quietly. "He mentioned it's regarding an operational matter." Dominique nodded. "I'll be available after I finish this document." Elena hesitated, then added, "There seems to be some issue with our systems on the ground. Several colleagues have messaged about delays across the network." "Is that so?" Dominique replied, her expression neutral. "I hope it's resolved soon." As Elena moved away, Dominique allowed herself a moment of private satisfaction. The message was being received loud and clear. Now it was time for the next phase. She reached for her phone and, for the first time since takeoff, composed a response to Thomas Bradford. "Mr. Bradford, I understand there's a situation with the Nexus integration. I'd be happy to discuss once I've been returned to my rightful seat 2A, which I reserved and paid for. Operational protocols should apply equally to all passengers regardless of their connections within the airline. Regards, Dominique Reynolds, CEO, Nexus Systems." She pressed send, then watched as the message status changed to delivered and then immediately to read. Bradford was waiting by his phone as she had anticipated. The response came less than 30 seconds later. "Ms. Reynolds, I apologize for any inconvenience. I've instructed the captain to address your seating situation immediately. The security protocol is affecting thousands of passengers. Please call me as soon as possible to discuss resolution." Dominique read the message but didn't respond. Instead, she closed her eyes briefly, considering the next move in this high-stakes chess game. In the cockpit, Captain Ramirez received another urgent message, this one leaving no room for interpretation. Captain Ramirez, CEO, Bradford. Priority instruction. Passenger Reynolds is to be immediately returned to her original first-class seat assignment, 2A. Current occupant to be relocated. Handle with utmost courtesy. Network situation directly connected to this matter. Authorization, Bradford Exec 1. Ramirez unbuckled his harness. "Take the controls," he instructed his first officer. "I need to handle this personally." As he exited the cockpit, Dominique's phone lit up with another message from Bradford. "Captain has been instructed to correct your seating assignment immediately. Please contact me once this is addressed." For the first time since boarding, Dominique felt the balance of power shift decisively. Not through confrontation, not through demands, not through emotional appeal, but through the silent application of leverage at precisely the right pressure point. She stored her tablet in her bag and waited, knowing that the next few moments would reveal exactly how seriously AtlanticGlobal was taking the situation. The captain was about to make an appearance, and James Walker was about to learn a valuable lesson about the true meaning of preferred passenger protocol. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." The intercom crackled to life, drawing all eyes toward the ceiling speakers. Captain Andrew Ramirez's voice carried the practiced calm of a veteran pilot, but with an undercurrent of tension that seasoned travelers immediately recognized. "We're currently cruising at 38,000 feet with favorable winds. Our flight time remains approximately 5 hours and 20 minutes. He paused, and in that brief silence, Dominique sensed the careful consideration behind his next words. "However, I've been advised of a seating assignment issue that requires immediate attention. Our cabin crew will be making a necessary adjustment momentarily. We appreciate your patience and understanding." The announcement concluded, leaving a buzz of speculative whispers in its wake. Passengers exchanged curious glances, many turning toward premium economy, where Dominique sat, her posture revealing nothing of the calculated maneuver she had executed. Captain Ramirez appeared at the front of the premium economy section, his tall figure commanding immediate attention. Unlike the typical pilot's brief appearance to greet select passengers, his presence now carried unmistakable purpose. He spoke briefly with Elena Rodriguez, who nodded and gestured toward Dominique. As the captain approached, Dominique noticed several passengers recording discreetly with their phones. The scene, a uniformed pilot personally addressing a passenger mid-flight, was unusual enough to warrant documentation. "Ms. Reynolds." Captain Ramirez spoke with formal deference. "Yes, Captain." She met his gaze directly. "Would you please come with me? I'd like to speak with you privately." Dominique gathered her belongings and followed him toward the galley area between premium economy and business class. Once they were relatively secluded, Ramirez spoke in a lowered voice. "Ms. Reynolds, I've received direct instructions from CEO Bradford regarding your seating assignment. I understand you were originally seated in 2A. That's correct. May I ask what happened?" Dominique appreciated his approach, not assuming, not dismissing, but inquiring. "I was informed by your lead flight attendant that my confirmed first-class seat was being reassigned to Mr. Walker due to what she called a preferred passenger protocol. I was told he has priority as a regional manager with the airline." Ramirez's expression tightened. "I see. And this led to your response." The careful phrasing told Dominique that he knew exactly who she was and what she had done, but was navigating the situation with appropriate caution. "Captain, I'm the CEO of Nexus Systems. Tomorrow morning I'm scheduled to sign a $700 million contract integrating our technologies with AtlanticGlobal's operations. The systems currently undergoing security verification are the same systems your airline is planning to adopt." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "And the current verification protocol?" "Was authorized by me, yes. It's a standard security measure designed to protect sensitive operations during potential integrity breaches." The diplomatic language didn't disguise the reality. She had effectively demonstrated her company's control over Atlantic Global's digital infrastructure in response to being displaced from her seat. Ramirez processed this information with the calculated assessment of someone accustomed to managing complex situations. "Miss Reynolds, I apologize for the way you were treated. I've been instructed to return you to your original seat immediately. Will this address your immediate concern?" "It would be a start, Captain." He nodded, understanding the implication. The seat was just the visible symptom of a deeper issue, one of respect policy and equal treatment. "If you'll follow me, I'll personally escort you back to first class." They moved through the business class cabin, the eyes of curious passengers following their progress. As they approached the first class curtain, Veronica Miller noticed their arrival, her practiced smile freezing in place. "Veronica." Captain Ramirez said, his tone leaving no room for objection. "Ms. Reynolds will be returning to her original seat in 2A. Please assist Mr. Walker with relocating to another available seat." Veronica's composure slipped momentarily. "Captain, I'm not sure that's—" "This comes directly from CEO Bradford." He interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. "It's not a request." In seat 2A, James Walker looked up from his movie irritation flashing across his features as he registered the captain standing beside his seat with Dominique. "What's going on?" he demanded, removing his headphones. "Mr. Walker." Captain Ramirez began, "There's been a misunderstanding regarding seat assignments. Ms. Reynolds was originally confirmed for this seat. I need to ask you to relocate." Walker's face flushed. "This is ridiculous. I'm a regional manager with elite status." Veronica already explained the protocol to this woman. The dismissive reference this woman hung in the air, underlining exactly what had transpired earlier. Dominique remained silent, allowing the captain to handle the situation. Her leverage wasn't in this confrontation. It was in the thousands of grounded passengers across the country, the millions of dollars in delays accumulating with every minute, and the $700 million contract now hanging in the balance. Mr. Walker Ramirez continued with measured authority. "This directive comes directly from CEO Bradford. Ms. Reynolds is to be returned to her original seat immediately. There's a larger operational situation that requires this action. The mention of Bradford Walker's ultimate superior changed his calculation visibly. His expression shifted from indignation to confusion. Bradford himself. What operational situation? I'm not at liberty to discuss details, but this is a priority matter affecting our entire network. The other first-class passengers watched with undisguised interest as the drama unfolded. Walker looked from the captain to Dominique, reassessing the woman he had so casually displaced. "Who exactly are you?" he asked, suspicion replacing arrogance. Before Dominique could respond, Elena Rodriguez appeared beside them. "Mr. Walker, we have a seat prepared for you in business class 8C. I'll assist you with your belongings." Walker hesitated, clearly weighing his options before recognizing he had none. With visible reluctance, he gathered his items and stood. "This is highly irregular," he muttered, avoiding Dominique's gaze. As he moved past her toward business class, Dominique noted the complete reversal of their earlier encounter. Now it was Walker being displaced, Walker being relocated, Walker experiencing the discomfort of having established expectations suddenly upended. The difference was that his displacement came with an explanation, with the courtesy of the captain's personal attention, and with an alternative that still offered significant comfort. All considerations she had been denied. "Your seat, Ms. Reynolds," Captain Ramirez said, gesturing to 2A. As Dominique settled back into her rightful place, she felt the eyes of the entire first-class cabin upon her. No longer was she the woman who had been pushed aside. Now she was the woman who had commanded the attention of the captain, who had caused a regional manager to be relocated, who had triggered some mysterious operational situation important enough for the CEO's direct involvement. "Is there anything else you need at the moment?" Ramirez asked. "A moment of privacy to make a call if possible." He nodded. "Of course." "And regarding the system verification," Dominique met his gaze directly. "I'll address that once I've spoken with Mr. Bradford." As the captain returned to the cockpit, Veronica Miller approached with visible trepidation. "Ms. Reynolds, can I offer you a pre-dinner drink? Perhaps champagne?" The same champagne she had been offered before, then denied, now presented again as if the earlier displacement had never occurred. "Water, thank you." Dominique replied, her tone neutral but carrying unmistakable weight. When Veronica retreated, Dominique finally reached for her phone. 16 missed calls, 27 text messages, and 39 emails had accumulated, all revolving around the digital freeze she had initiated. She opened her thread with Thomas Bradford and typed, "Mr. Bradford, I'm back in my original seat. I'm prepared to discuss the system verification protocol now. Please be advised that this situation arose from a pattern of behavior, not an isolated incident. When we speak, I'd like to address both the immediate resolution and the underlying cultural issues it reveals." The response was immediate. "Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. I'm prepared to discuss both. Please call me at your earliest convenience. The verification protocol is affecting thousands of passengers and millions in revenue with every passing minute." Dominique smiled slightly at the transparent attempt to pressure her with scale. Of course she understood the impact that was precisely the point of her demonstration. She dialed Bradford's number, knowing that the conversation to follow would reshape not just her immediate flight experience, but the entire relationship between Nexus Systems and AtlanticGlobal Airlines. The real negotiation was about to begin. "I heard she controls their entire computer system." The whisper came from 3B, a middle-aged businessman leaning across the aisle to his companion. One text from her and the whole airline just stopped. "How do you know that?" his seatmate replied skeptically. "My brother works at O'Hare, says every AtlanticGlobal flight is grounded for system verification, whatever that means." The whispers weren't limited to first class. Throughout the aircraft, the unusual sequence of events had spawned a web of theories. The captain personally escorting a passenger from premium economy to first class. The regional manager's abrupt relocation. the mysterious operational situation referenced in the captain's announcement. In the rear galley, Elena Rodriguez checked her phone during a brief break. The crew message board was erupting with updates from colleagues on the ground, ORD, LHR sitting at gate for 45 men. Passengers getting hostile. JFK total chaos. No boarding passes being issued. Manual processing only. DFW supervisors called in. All flights showing security hold. Elena scrolled through the messages, piecing together the scope of the disruption. Whatever had happened, it wasn't isolated to Flight 372. Something had triggered a network-wide pause in operations. And somehow the woman in seat 2A, the woman who had been so casually displaced, then reinstated with unprecedented urgency, was at the center of it. Elena made her way forward, passing through premium economy, where passengers were now openly discussing the situation. Ryan Cooper, the tech professional who had been recording earlier, was showing something on his phone to those seated nearby. "Look, he was saying every single Atlantic Global flight is delayed. Something massive is happening." As Elena approached business class, she noticed James Walker engaged in an intense phone conversation, his face flushed with anger or embarrassment or both. He covered the mouthpiece when he saw her. "I need to speak with the captain," he demanded. "Now." "I'm sorry, Mr. Walker, the captain is currently unavailable," Elena replied evenly. "Can I assist you with something? Do you have any idea who that woman is? The one you put in my seat?" The phrasing, "my seat," wasn't lost on Elena. The entitlement remained unshaken despite everything. "Sir, she was actually returned to her original seat," Elena corrected gently. "And yes, we're aware of who Ms. Reynolds is." Walker's expression shifted. "Well, I've just been informed she's the CEO of Nexus Systems. Do you understand what that means? They control our entire digital infrastructure, the system verification affecting every flight. That's her doing." Elena maintained her professional composure, but internally the pieces were falling into place. The casual displacement of a black female executive, the system-wide response, the captain's urgent intervention, the reversal of fortune. "I understand your concern, Mr. Walker. Would you like something to drink while you wait?" Walker glared at her, recognizing the deliberate deflection. "This is going to be a PR nightmare," he muttered, returning to his phone. As Elena continued toward first class, she couldn't help but admire the precise response Dominique Reynolds had orchestrated. No shouting, no scene, no demand to speak to a manager, just a quiet demonstration of leverage at exactly the right pressure point. In seat 2A, Dominique concluded her call with Thomas Bradford. The conversation had been brief but productive, establishing clear expectations for both the immediate resolution and tomorrow's meeting, Miss Reynolds, Elena said, approaching with a fresh glass of water. "Can I get you anything else?" Dominique looked up, noting the subtle shift in Elena's demeanor, a new awareness in her eyes. "No, thank you, Elena. This is fine." Elena hesitated, then lowered her voice. "I want to apologize for what happened earlier." That wasn't right. The simple acknowledgement, personal not corporate, registered with Dominique. "Thank you. I appreciate that." As Elena moved away, Dominique noticed Veronica Miller watching from the galley. Her earlier confidence replaced by visible anxiety. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and everyone in the cabin was gradually becoming aware of exactly how and why. Near the back of the plane, Ryan Cooper was doing more than just checking flight statuses. With his background in tech, he had connected the dots faster than most. His Twitter thread was already gaining traction, thread witnessing something incredible on #AtlanticGlobal Flight 372. Black female executive displaced from first class for airline manager. Now, every AG flight nationwide grounded after she makes one phone call. Captain personally escorted her back to original seat. 17. The story was spreading beyond the aircraft, beyond the terminals where passengers waited for delayed flights, beyond the operations centers where technicians scrambled to address the verification protocol. It was becoming a real-time case study in power, respect, and consequences. In premium economy, Sofia Alvarez had followed the developments with particular interest. As a mid-level HR director for a retail company, she had witnessed similar dynamics play out in corporate settings. The casual dismissal of women of color, the unwritten rules that seemed to apply differently depending on who you were. But she had rarely seen such a precise response, such a clear demonstration of leverage. She leaned toward her seatmate. "That woman they moved back to first class, I think she's the reason all Atlantic Global flights are grounded right now. Seriously, how do you know my cousin works at the Seattle gate? Says the system is requiring executive verification for every single flight. Nothing can depart without manual approval." The information continued to spread throughout the cabin, passenger to passenger, text message to text message, social media post to social media post. The story evolving with each retelling, but the central elements remaining consistent. A black female executive had been displaced without cause. She had responded not with complaint, but with demonstration. An entire airline was now feeling the consequences. In the cockpit, Captain Ramirez received an update from Atlantic Global Headquarters protocol resolution in progress. Ms. Reynolds has agreed to limited system restoration. Prioritize customer communication. Expect full functionality within 60 minutes. Bradford authorization. Ramirez turned to his first officer. Looks like our VIP in 2A has made her point. What exactly happened? The first officer asked. From what I gather, Veronica and Walker displaced her using some made-up preferred passenger policy. Turns out she's the CEO of Nexus Systems. The first officer's eyes widened. The company handling our entire digital transition, the $700 million contract, the very same. And apparently she demonstrated exactly why that contract is worth every penny. Ramirez reached for the intercom. It was time to update the passengers, those on Flight 372 and indirectly the thousands of others currently waiting at gates across the country. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Ramirez again. I'm pleased to inform you that the operational verification affecting our network is being resolved. We've been advised that all systems should return to normal functionality shortly. Our flight continues on schedule, and we appreciate your patience during this process. What he didn't say, what he couldn't say over a public announcement, was that the operational verification had never been about technical systems at all. It had been about respect, about principle, about the casual expectation that some people should simply accept being displaced, being diminished, being dismissed, and about the precise demonstration of what happens when that expectation meets its match. As the announcement concluded, Dominique felt her phone vibrate with an incoming message from Bradford System Restoration beginning. Contract meeting still scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow. I'll be attending personally along with our Chief Diversity Officer. I believe we have some additional matters to discuss beyond the technical integration. She smiled slightly. Yes, they certainly did. What the hell kind of stunt was that? James Walker's voice carried across the first-class cabin as he stormed past the divider, curtain face flushed with a volatile mixture of embarrassment and anger. He loomed over seat 2A where Dominique sat reviewing documents on her tablet. Do you have any idea how many passengers you've affected? The confrontation drew immediate attention. Phones tilted upward, capturing the moment when the man who had so casually displaced Dominique now challenged her directly, his professional veneer cracking under the weight of humiliation. Dominique looked up slowly, her expression neutral yet commanding. She didn't raise her voice, didn't match his emotional intensity. Instead, she simply closed her tablet and met his gaze with composed precision. "Mr. Walker," she said, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by nearby passengers but not pitched as a performance. "I believe you're referring to the system verification protocol that was activated earlier." "System verification," he scoffed. "You deliberately sabotaged an entire airline because you didn't get your way about a seat." The framing was telling, transforming her response to injustice into a childish tantrum, her strategic leverage into emotional retribution. "That's an interesting interpretation," Dominique replied, maintaining her composure. "I prefer to think of it as a demonstration of why corporate policies should be applied consistently, regardless of who they're affecting." Before Walker could respond, Veronica Miller appeared beside him, tension evident in her rigid posture. "Mr. Walker, please return to your seat. The captain has requested that all passengers remain in their assigned seating." The irony of her sudden concern for assigned seating wasn't lost on anyone watching. "You don't understand what she's done," Walker insisted, his voice rising. "She's holding the entire airline hostage, thousands of passengers delayed, millions in costs, all because she couldn't accept a simple seat reassignment." Dominique remained still, allowing his outburst to hang in the air, its disproportionate emotion contrasting sharply with her measured calm. "Was it simple, Mr. Walker?" she finally asked. "When you took my seat, did you consider it a simple reassignment? Or did you see it as your due? A regional manager with connections shouldn't have to sit in business class when there's a first-class seat occupied by someone who doesn't look like she belongs there." The directness of her observation cut through his bluster. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the unspoken dynamics now being named explicitly. Walker's expression hardened. "This isn't about race. This is about status and protocol." "Which protocol exactly?" Dominique inquired, her tone genuinely curious, rather than accusatory. "The preferred passenger protocol that Ms. Miller cited when removing me. I'd be interested to see that in Atlantic Global's official policies." Veronica's cheeks flushed. They both knew no such protocol existed, at least not in any documented form that would withstand scrutiny. Captain Ramirez appeared at the front of the cabin, his presence immediately commanding attention. "Mr. Walker, return to your assigned seat immediately. This is not a request." Walker hesitated, visibly calculating his options before the authority of the captain. "This isn't over," he muttered to Dominique, his voice low enough that only she could hear the implicit threat. "You're right about that," she replied evenly. "It's just beginning." As Walker retreated to business class, Ramirez approached Dominique. "Ms. Reynolds, I apologize for that confrontation. Are you all right?" "Perfectly fine, Captain. Thank you for your intervention." He lowered his voice. "I've received an update from headquarters. The system verification protocol is being gradually lifted, starting with immediate departures. CEO Bradford has requested a full briefing with you upon landing." Dominique nodded. "I'll be available, and the $700 million contract discussion scheduled for tomorrow morning. Still proceeding from what I understand. Bradford will be attending personally." As the captain returned to the cockpit, Dominique felt the weight of attention from the first-class cabin. The confrontation with Walker had transformed a private power play into public theater, revealing the underlying tensions that had driven her response. Elena Rodriguez approached, deliberately placing herself between Dominique and the curious gazes of other passengers. "Ms. Reynolds' dinner service will begin shortly. Would you like to see the menu?" The simple courtesy creating a buffer of normalcy around her registered with Dominique. "Yes, thank you, Elena." As Elena handed her the premium menu, she added quietly, "Just so you know what happened earlier. It happens more than anyone admits. Thank you for not letting it slide." The comment carried weight beyond professional courtesy. It was acknowledgement from someone who had witnessed similar dynamics play out repeatedly, who understood the significance of challenging them. Across the aisle, a distinguished older woman who had been observing the unfolding drama leaned toward Dominique. "Forgive my intrusion," she said, her voice carrying the gentle southern cadence of old money, but I couldn't help overhearing. "I'm Elaine Woodward, Atlantic Global board member." Dominique's expression revealed nothing, but internally she recalibrated. "A board member. On this flight. Witnessing everything." "Dominique Reynolds," she replied, offering a slight nod. "CEO of Nexus Systems." Yes, I gathered that, Elaine said with a knowing smile. Thomas Bradford messaged me about 20 minutes ago. Quite frantic. I imagine he would be. Elaine studied her with undisguised interest. You know, Ms. Reynolds, in 40 years of corporate governance, I've seen countless responses to, let's call them dignity violations. Most people either accept them silently or react emotionally. Few respond with such precise calibration. I believe in proportional response, Ms. Woodward. Clearly. And now you have the attention of our entire executive team, not to mention the board. She paused, considering her next words carefully. The contract tomorrow, it's important to you, $700 million important, Dominique confirmed. 3 years of development, a transformational integration for both companies. Elaine nodded thoughtfully. And yet you risked it over a seat assignment. That tells me something significant about your principles. The seat was merely the visible symptom, Ms. Woodward. The disease runs deeper. Indeed, it does. Elaine agreed, surprising Dominique with her candor, which is precisely what I'll be discussing with the board following this illuminating flight. As Elaine returned to her reading, Dominique processed the unexpected alliance. A board member had just signaled support, had recognized the incident not as an overreaction to a minor inconvenience, but as a principled stand against an institutional pattern. Her phone vibrated with an incoming message, this one from Terrence Williams, her COO, social media exploding with #AtlanticGlobal and #SeatJustice. Video from your flight showing Walker confronting you has hit Twitter. Press inquiries coming in about system delays. How do you want to handle? The situation was evolving beyond the aircraft, beyond the airline's internal operations into the court of public opinion. Exactly as she had anticipated when she had chosen not to make a scene, not to raise her voice, but to demonstrate her power through strategic leverage. She typed a brief reply. No comment at this time. Let the situation speak for itself. Contract meeting proceeding tomorrow as planned. Prepare additional clauses regarding corporate culture alignment and diversity commitments. As she sent the message, the cabin intercom chimed. Captain Ramirez's voice followed. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain with an update. I'm pleased to inform you that the operational verification affecting AtlanticGlobal's network has been resolved. All systems are returning to normal functionality and operations across our network are resuming. We appreciate your patience during this process. What remained unspoken but understood by everyone who had witnessed the events on Flight 372 was the direct connection between Dominique's return to Seat 2A and the resolution of the operational verification. Not coincidence. Causation. As dinner service began, Dominique accepted a glass of the champagne she had been originally offered, then denied, then offered again. The bubbles caught the cabin light as she raised the glass slightly, not in celebration, but in acknowledgement of a battle precisely fought and definitively won. Not through emotion, not through confrontation, but through the calculated application of leverage at exactly the right pressure point. The message had been delivered. The real negotiation would begin tomorrow. I believe this goes beyond a simple seating misunderstanding, Mr. Bradford. Dominique's voice carried clearly in the enclosed space of the private first-class phone booth. Captain Ramirez had arranged for her to use this space for her call with AtlanticGlobal's CEO, a courtesy that underscored how dramatically the power dynamic had shifted. I agree completely, Ms. Reynolds. Thomas Bradford replied, his tone carefully calibrated to convey both authority and conciliation. At 56, he had navigated countless corporate crises, but few with the precise leverage that Dominique now wielded. What happened was unacceptable, and I apologize on behalf of AtlanticGlobal. I appreciate that Dominique acknowledged, but this incident reveals deeper issues within your corporate culture. The ease with which your staff fabricated a non-existent protocol to justify displacing me suggests this isn't an isolated incident. The slight pause before Bradford's response told her she had struck a nerve. What exactly are you looking for here, Ms. Reynolds? beyond the immediate resolution of your seating situation. A simple question that cut to the heart of the negotiation. What price would she put on her dignity? What concessions would transform this from personal insult to institutional change? 3 things. Mr. Bradford, she replied, her voice carrying the practiced precision that had made her a formidable negotiator. First, full restoration of your operational systems effective immediately. Thank you, he said, relief evident in his voice. And second, a substantial revision to tomorrow's contract. I'll have my legal team send over new language regarding accountability metrics for cultural integration between our companies. Nexus won't simply be providing technology, we'll be establishing benchmarks for how that technology is implemented. Another pause longer this time. That's unconventional for a technology integration contract. So is demonstrating your digital vulnerability mid-flight, Mr. Bradford. We're well beyond conventional at this point. She could almost hear him calculating the costs, weighing the PR disaster currently unfolding against the revised contract terms she was proposing. And the third requirement he finally asked. A complete review of your passenger displacement policies with particular attention to how they're applied to different demographic groups. I want data. Mr. Bradford, who gets bumped, who gets upgraded, who gets the benefit of operational discretion. And I want that review conducted by an independent third party. You're essentially asking for a diversity audit of our entire customer service operation. I'm not asking, Mr. Bradford. I'm establishing a condition for our continued partnership. The silence that followed spoke volumes. She had pushed beyond the expected corporate apology, beyond the personal accommodation into territory that would require structural change. Ms. Reynolds Bradford finally said, his voice recalibrating into something more genuine than his initial corporate tone. I want to be clear that I personally find what happened to you appalling. But what you're proposing would require board approval and significant operational changes. You have a board member on this flight who witnessed everything, Ms. Elaine Woodward. She seems quite supportive of addressing these issues substantively. Bradford's sharp intake of breath confirmed Dominique had just played a card he hadn't anticipated. Elaine is on your flight in 3C. We've had a very illuminating conversation about corporate governance and accountability. The calculation behind Bradford's pause was almost audible, the recognition that this situation had evolved beyond damage control into potential institutional transformation. I'll need to consult with our executive team, he said finally. Of course, and I'll need to determine whether Nexus Systems can partner with an organization that doesn't share our commitment to equitable treatment. $700 million is significant, Mr. Bradford. But principles determine who we do business with. She delivered this not as a threat, but as a simple statement of fact. The leverage wasn't just in the immediate digital freeze she had demonstrated, but in the future partnership she could withhold. I understand, Bradford replied, his tone suggesting he truly did. What timeline are you proposing for resolution? The system verification protocol has already been partially lifted. Full functionality will be restored when we conclude this call as a show of good faith. The contract revisions I expect to discuss at our 9 a.m. meeting tomorrow. The policy review should commence within 30 days with preliminary findings within 90 days. Dominique could hear Bradford taking notes. And regarding the staff involved in tonight's incident, she had anticipated this question, the corporate reflex to identify sacrificial employees rather than address structural issues. I'm not interested in individual terminations, Mr. Bradford. Firing Veronica Miller or disciplining James Walker might create the illusion of accountability, but it wouldn't address the conditions that enabled their behavior. That's surprisingly generous given the circumstances. It's not generosity. It's strategy. Cultural problems require cultural solutions. I'm interested in change, not casualties. As she said this, Dominique realized how deeply she believed it. The incident had never been about punishing specific individuals. It had been about demonstrating the consequences of casual disregard, about establishing that her dignity was non-negotiable. Bradford seemed to recognize the wisdom in her approach. "I believe we can work with these conditions, Ms. Reynolds. I'll meet with our executive team immediately and prepare for tomorrow's discussion." "One more thing," Dominique added. "I'd like Captain Ramirez commended for his handling of this situation. His professionalism and clarity were exemplary. Noted and agreed. Is there anything else you require before we conclude?" Dominique considered for a moment. "No. I believe we understand each other, Mr. Bradford." As she ended the call, Dominique remained in the quiet of the phone booth for a moment longer, processing the conversation. She had leveraged a personal slight into institutional accountability without raising her voice, without making demands, without creating a scene. Instead, she had demonstrated precisely the kind of power that couldn't be dismissed, the kind that affected bottom lines, operational capacity, and public perception. When she emerged, Elena Rodriguez was waiting to escort her back to her seat. "Everything okay, Ms. Reynolds?" "Yes. Thank you, Elena. Just finalizing some operational details with headquarters." The understated description of what had clearly been a high-stakes negotiation brought a slight smile to Elena's face. "The captain asked me to inform you that we've received confirmation that all systems are returning to normal operations. Flights are resuming their departures network-wide." "That's good to hear." As they approached first class, Dominique noticed the shift in atmosphere. The other passengers watched her with new awareness, their perception transformed by the events they had witnessed. No longer was she simply another traveler. Now she was someone who had demonstrated extraordinary leverage with calm precision. In seat 2A, her rightful seat, Dominique found a handwritten note placed on the armrest. "Ms. Reynolds, I believe we'll have much to discuss at tomorrow's board meeting. What happened tonight speaks volumes about both individuals and institutions. Looking forward to our continued conversation. Elaine Woodward." Dominique tucked the note into her tablet case, recognizing it for what it was, not just personal support but institutional alliance. Elaine Woodward had recognized the significance of the incident beyond its immediate circumstances, had seen it as indicative of cultural patterns that required attention at the highest levels of governance. As the flight continued westward through the darkening sky, Dominique felt the complex emotions of the evening settling into a quiet certainty. She had not just reclaimed a seat. She had established a precedent, had demonstrated that dignity wasn't negotiable, that respect couldn't be selectively applied, that power came in many forms, including the silent precision of knowing exactly which pressure points would create lasting change. Her phone vibrated with an update from Terrence contract revisions underway. Legal team working through the night. Bradford's team has already reached out to coordinate. Seat justice trending nationally. Press inquiries mounting. How would you like to proceed with media? Dominique considered her response carefully. The situation had evolved beyond a personal incident into something with potential industry-wide implications. How she handled the public narrative would be just as important as the contract revisions. She typed no press statements tonight. Let the situation speak for itself. Prepare talking points focused on institutional accountability rather than individual incident. This isn't about me. It's about equitable treatment for all passengers. Across the aisle, Elaine Woodward watched with quiet approval, recognizing the strategic restraint that had characterized Dominique's entire approach. Not seeking publicity, not exploiting the viral moment. Simply allowing the consequences to unfold naturally, drawing attention to the underlying issues rather than personalizing the conflict. The true negotiation had only just begun. 3 years had passed since Flight 372, and what had begun as a personal response to displacement had evolved into an industry-wide transformation in accountability. Standing at the podium of the International Aviation Ethics Symposium, Dominique Reynolds surveyed the audience of airline executives, technology leaders, and industry regulators gathered to address the intersection of ethics and passenger experience. The journey that had begun in Seat 2A had led far beyond a single flight, beyond a single contract, beyond even a single airline. The accountability structures established in the aftermath of her displacement had become industry standard with measurable improvements in equitable treatment across demographic categories. What distinguished my experience that night wasn't the displacement itself, she told the assembled leaders. It was the capacity to demonstrate its consequences with precision. Most passengers lack that leverage. Their dignity violations go unaddressed, their patterns unrecognized, their experiences dismissed as isolated incidents. From the front row, Thomas Bradford, now AtlanticGlobal's executive chairman, nodded in acknowledgement. Under his leadership, the airline had transformed its approach to passenger equity, implementing the industry's first comprehensive demographic accountability metrics for service delivery. The numbers speak for themselves. Dominique continued gesturing toward the screen where industry data appeared. 37% reduction in demographically disparate treatment across 3 years had passed since Flight 372, and what had begun as a personal response to displacement had evolved into an industry-wide transformation in accountability. Standing at the podium of the International Aviation Ethics Symposium, Dominique Reynolds surveyed the audience of airline executives, technology leaders, and industry regulators gathered to address the intersection of ethics and passenger experience. The journey that had begun in Seat 2A had led far beyond a single flight, beyond a single contract, beyond even a single airline. The accountability structures established in the aftermath of her displacement had become industry standard with measurable improvements in equitable treatment across demographic categories. What distinguished my experience that night wasn't the displacement itself, she told the assembled leaders. It was the capacity to demonstrate its consequences with precision. Most passengers lack that leverage. Their dignity violations go unaddressed, their patterns unrecognized, their experiences dismissed as isolated incidents. From the front row, Thomas Bradford, now AtlanticGlobal's executive chairman, nodded in acknowledgement. Under his leadership, the airline had transformed its approach to passenger equity, implementing the industry's first comprehensive demographic accountability metrics for service delivery. The numbers speak for themselves. Dominique continued gesturing toward the screen where industry data appeared. 37% reduction in demographically disparate treatment across major carriers. 42% improvement in consistent application of discretionary policies. 53% increase in transparent classification of passenger complaints. These aren't just operational improvements. They reflect a fundamental shift in how dignity is understood, not as courtesy extended at discretion, but as right ensured through accountability. As she concluded her address, Dominique reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She hadn't raised her voice on that flight, hadn't created a scene, hadn't demanded special treatment. She had simply demonstrated the consequences of casual disregard with surgical precision, transforming a moment of displacement into a movement for accountability. The standing ovation that followed wasn't merely professional courtesy, but genuine recognition of the transformation she had catalyzed not through confrontation or demand, but through strategic leverage applied with precision. After the keynote, James Walker approached her with the humility of someone permanently changed by experience. Once the regional manager who had casually displaced her, he now served as AtlanticGlobal's executive director of passenger experience transformation. 3 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be thanking you for having me removed from first class, I'd have thought they were delusional, he acknowledged with rueful honesty. But experiencing displacement firsthand, feeling what it's like to have protocols suddenly applied against you rather than for you, it changed everything about how I understood power and privilege. The transformation extended far beyond individuals to institutional structures. Elena Rodriguez, once a flight attendant trying to navigate impossible dynamics, had risen to AtlanticGlobal's chief operating officer, implementing accountability metrics across operational touchpoints. As Dominique boarded her flight home that evening, she noticed the permanent changes implemented since her displacement 3 years earlier. standardized verification procedures, applied consistently to all passengers. Transparent display of service policies, diverse staffing at every customer touchpoint. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "This is Captain Elena Rodriguez. We'll be departing shortly and expect an on-time arrival." Dominique smiled at the announcement. Elena's promotion represented another dimension of the transformation, the elevation of voices previously confined to supportive roles. As the aircraft lifted into the evening sky, Dominique thought about her grandmother's wisdom. Sometimes power is quiet. Sometimes it's just knowing which switch controls the lights. The metaphor had proven more literal than either of them could have anticipated. But the true lesson hadn't been about controlling systems. It had been about transforming them, about using leverage not for personal advantage, but for institutional evolution. Power, after all, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it moved in silence, building momentum until its impact became undeniable. Sometimes it was just knowing which switch controlled the lights. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more powerful stories of dignity, respect, and strategic change. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a situation where someone demonstrated their power through quiet precision rather than loud confrontation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that notification bell to stay updated on our latest videos that inspire and empower. Thank you for watching. Black CEO kicked out of VIP seat for white passenger. She immediately freezes airline's $700 budget.